Most of Disney's animated movies are full of incredible little things, little secrets and funny mistakes that very few people ever noticed.
Oh, really?
So, are you ready to discover all these curiosities about these amazing animations?
Wow.
If there's one thing Disney loves to do, it's hiding Easter eggs in their movies, especially when they have to do with the company's mascot, Mickey Mouse. In Inside Out 2, we get an example of this during the end credits, which are decorated with several drawings. One of those drawings has the iconic shape of Mickey Mouse's face, and that's definitely not a coincidence. Bet on it, the few who stayed through the credits and caught that detail while watching the movie must have been pretty surprised. Now, how about we talk a little bit about Lilo and Stitch, Disney's craziest alien movie, which even got a live-action remake in 2025. One of the main elements of this franchise is that Stitch landed in Hawaii and made friends with the locals, but that wasn't always the case. In one of the scrap versions of the story, he would have lived alone on a farm in Kansas. And on top of that, this version didn't even have humans. The other characters were all animals. That was changed because putting Stitch alongside humans helped highlight just how weird he really is, and it worked perfectly. Pretty interesting, right? And look, these are only 2 of the 19 things nobody noticed in Disney movies. So get comfy, another Cinewave is starting right now. Disney's Easter eggs often reference certain elements from the studio's films, instead of just characters like Mickey. Moana has one of these, but you wouldn't notice it unless you were really paying attention. In one scene of the movie, we see a very unusual yellow flower. It's clearly not just any ordinary plant, but only those who watch Tangled will remember that it's the magical flower responsible for giving Rapunzel her powers. It's a super specific detail made for the sharpest fans, but honestly, even if you're a hardcore fan and very attentive, you probably wouldn't have noticed it without a really good memory. Something sad is that there are Disney movies where we'll never get to look for Easter eggs simply because they were never finished or released. One example is Gigantic, a reimagining of the story of Jack and the Beanstalk in the same style as many other Disney reinterpretations like Tangled or The Princess and the Frog, which take classic fairy tales and turn them into incredible adventures. Gigantic was announced in 2015 and was set to be released in 2018, but sadly it was cancelled due to creative differences and production issues. Such a shame, it could have been one of the studio's best animations. You know what's even sadder? Disney was so sure this movie would be released that it was actually referenced in Zootopia in a scene showing images of several movies from that universe. All Disney films, but with characters portrayed as animals. Here, Gigantic is called Giraffic. Besides that, there's also a parody of Moana, which hadn't even been released in theaters yet when Zootopia came out. Not to mention parodies of films that had already been released like Frozen and Wreck-It Ralph, 2 absolute hits. And since we're talking about Zootopia, did you know that Nick and Judy weren't always meant to be the main characters? Originally, that role belonged to a spy rabbit called Jack Savage. Back then, the movie wouldn't have been called Zootopia, instead it was called Savage Seas. It was going to be something in the style of a James Bond film, except set in Zootopia's animal universe. And the plan was for it to be just the beginning of a saga of multiple films. Over time, the concept changed, and Jack Savage was, so to speak, split into 2 characters, Judy and Nick. But they became so different from Jack Savage that it's not crazy to think he might still exist somewhere in the Zootopia universe, living his own adventures. Moana is another one that could have turned out completely different if the creators hadn't scrapped certain ideas. For example, there was the idea that the navigator would have 9 brothers, each with a really cool design and a unique personality. The plan was that they'd all get lost and Moana would have to set out on a journey to save them. It would have been an amazing idea, but the characters were cut when the film's script started going through multiple changes. In the end, she became an only child until she finally gained a little sister in Moana 2. Finding out stuff like this is incredible, right? And if you're also a fan of the Navigator's movies, drop a comment below with #Moana. Back to Inside Out 2. This animation didn't just want to honor Mickey, it also wanted to give a little sneak peek at Pixar's next production, Elio. That's because the silhouette of the main character shows up in one of Riley's memory orbs, a little wink for fans who were waiting to watch this outer space and alien adventure. Unlike the Gigantic reference made by Zootopia, this one didn't backfire because Elio was released a year after Inside Out 2. It would have been kinda sad if Disney once again got us hyped for a movie just to later cancel it, don't you think? But if you think that was the most surprising time a Disney character popped up in a totally different movie, you're wrong. In Frozen, it happens in a pretty unexpected way. During Anna's wedding, we see 2 members of royalty among the crowd. The thing is, they're not just any royals, they're Rapunzel and Flynn Rider from Tangled, who by that point must already be married. In fact, Rapunzel even has her hair cut short in that scene, showing that it's not too long after the end of Tangled. So does that mean that instead of just being a fun reference, Arendelle from Frozen exists in the same universe as Corona from Tangled? The opposite has also happened. A Frozen character appearing in another movie. Except this time it's even weirder because the film in question is Big Hero 6. Elsa and Rapunzel's stories kinda seem like they take place in the same world and time period, but how do you explain Hans's face ending up on a wanted poster in a present-day police station? It's probably just an Easter egg for laughs, or maybe Hans somehow managed to time travel into the future by accident, which would be both hilarious and pretty bizarre. And that wasn't even the only time the villain from the first Frozen showed up in this movie. He also appears as a statue. That reference actually makes way more sense, since he and the characters from Frozen lived in a distant past and would have been seen as historical figures in modern times. By the way, remember when we said that Zootopia's main character was originally going to be someone totally different? Well, Disney movies usually go through a lot of changes before becoming the final product. Encanto, which was a massive success when it came out, also went through that. Remember Bruno, the guy we don't talk about? He almost had another name, Oscar. Kind of unexpected, but we have to admit the character even kind of looks like an Oscar. The reason for the change is actually pretty silly. It only happened so it would rhyme better with the song We Don't Talk About Bruno. The song ended up being a huge hit, so it seems the change was totally worth it in the end. We've already talked about plenty of really cool details, but Disney's animations also have a few little continuity mistakes. And honestly, animating every single scene of a movie is a real challenge. For example, in one scene from the first Inside Out, Riley walks past a white cable, but later in another shot, the cable shows up again, only now it's black, which makes no sense at all. Unless, of course, the cables in the Inside Out universe are magical. No, for some reason, that's harder to believe than the idea that we have little people living in our heads controlling our feelings. Remember The Incredibles from 2004? Even that incredible Disney classic has its mistakes. In the movie's climax, Elastigirl presses a button on a controller, but when she's supposed to press the same button again, she pushes a different one instead. But that was her mistake. The strange thing is that right after, Elastigirl supposedly presses the correct button, but if you watch her fingers closely, you can see she actually presses another different button again. Does she ever learn? If you don't have that same problem with buttons, it'll be super easy to click the subscribe button, and it's totally worth it, because that way you'll get all our videos about your favorite cartoons. In Tangled, there's an even stranger mistake that goes against all logic. We're talking about the scene where Gothel, Rapunzel's fake mother, stabs Flynn Rider. The thing is, he gets a mortal wound, but her knife stays completely clean, instead of being covered in blood. We know it's a kids movie that can't show too much violence, but it doesn't change the fact that it looks pretty weird. And still in the movie's climax, there's another kind of funny mistake. Flynn Rider gets handcuffed by Gothel, but when Rapunzel approaches him, the cuff disappears from his hand, only to magically reappear in the very next shot. She really needs to decide whether she wants it to stay on his arm or not. You can't have it both ways. Okay, enough mistakes, right? Let's switch things up and go back to Zootopia, which, as you've probably noticed, has a lot of interesting things to talk about. That's because this animation is packed with details, and some of them can only really be understood by adults. Like a line Judy says when she's adding up the fine that Nick owes. She says she's just a silly little bunny, but she's good at multiplying. In the context of the movie, she's talking in a mathematical sense, but it's also a double entendre, since rabbits are famously known for multiplying a lot, in the sense of having tons of babies. There's another joke like that in the first Toy Story, which fans at the time only truly understood once they were older. In that scene, Bo Peep tells Woody that she asked someone else to watch her sheep that day. Woody gets super excited because that means the two of them can spend some time together and, well, get a little romantic. Going further back in Disney's movie timeline, we get to Hercules from 1997, which has a somewhat creepy Easter egg connected to what might be Disney's most classic animation, The Lion King. That's because in one scene, the Greek demigod shows up wearing a lion's pelt as clothing. And the thing is, that pelt looks a lot like Scar, the villain from The Lion King. And in case you haven't seen that movie, Scar meets a pretty tragic end, taken out by his own hyenas, which means his pelt could have really been used to make that outfit. Creepy, right? The video's coming to an end, so pick one of the two videos we left on your screen to keep having fun. Thanks, and see you next time!